If Trump, decide to take further action, our response, our retaliation, will be seismic. First, we will tell all neighboring countries and countries around the world not to join the United States in its economic war.
Iran's big nuclear warning to Trump as Tehran hints at an earthquake-like retaliation threat. Mojtaba pushes Iran toward nuclear weapons as Tehran threatens a terrifying payback against its enemies. Iran vows to hit back hard as Tehran again promises an earthquake-like strike against the U.S. As Trump claims Hormuz as U.S. land, Iran shuts the key Gulf waterway in a major shocker. Iran throws down the gauntlet to Washington, join the U.S., and Tehran warns, "We will strike." Mojtaba's aide threatens Trump's allies as Iran warns there will be not a drop of oil through Hormuz. Iran sounds the nuclear alarm as Tehran says it may have no choice but to seek a nuclear weapon. Iran's security chief threatened earthquake-like retaliation against Trump, according to Iran International. Mohsen Rezaei warned that Iran would strike back if Trump took further military or economic action against Tehran. He also warned Iran's neighboring countries against joining Washington's economic campaign, saying cooperation could make them targets. Mohsen Rezaei said, and I quote, "We tell all the countries around us not to join the United States in its economic war, otherwise we will consider them enemies. We are not seeking to expand the war, but if countries around Iran cooperate with the Americans in the economic war, we will strike their interests. If countries around Iran cooperate with the Americans in the economic war, not a drop of oil will leave through the Strait of Hormuz, and we will also target other routes through which oil is exported." Unquote. Rezaei also called for changes to Iran's diplomatic approach, citing what he described as repeated U.S. breaches of previous commitments. Rezaei also accused Trump of creating greater nuclear insecurity by launching military attacks against Iran. Mohsen Rezaei said, and I quote, "Trump has created nuclear insecurity instead of nuclear security. Iran has accepted all international safeguards, has complied with them, is a member of the NPT, and has agreed to inspections. Iran is the only country that is ahead of all other countries in its commitment to nuclear regulations."
On the naval blockade, the naval blockade is nothing new. We have been under a naval blockade for several months now, yet we have continued to sell our oil. In just the past 1 or 2 months, we have sold 70 million barrels of oil. The first week after the agreement was a good week because we shipped out the 70 million barrels of oil we had on hand. Every day, we are selling oil equal to our daily production despite the presence of U.S. naval vessels. That is what Mr. Trump's naval blockade has amounted to. If Trump, decide to take further action, our response, our retaliation, will be seismic. First, we will tell all neighboring countries and countries around the world not to join the United States in its economic war. Any country that takes part in imposing economic restrictions on us will be regarded as an enemy. Of course, we will first negotiate with them. We will hold talks and tell them to step aside and distance themselves from the United States. But if they do not act, we will strike. We will target that country's interests.
On August 22nd, Iran said its weapons and defense equipment output doubled over 1 year, despite strikes on limited parts of its military-industrial sector. Defense spokesman Rezaei announced the increase on state television, according to Sputnik, presenting the rise as proof of Iran's expanding domestic defense capacity. The surge came despite U.S. and Israeli strikes on parts of Iran's defense industry, as Tehran claimed its military production network absorbed the damage. Tehran said some defense facilities were damaged during the reported 12-day war, acknowledging that enemy strikes reached selected parts of its industrial base. But Iran claimed production never stopped as its military kept using weapons, saying factory output continued alongside efforts to replenish combat losses. Rezaei said, and I quote, "Our production volume in the past year has increased twofold in terms of weapons and defense equipment produced in our country. This is despite the fact that during the 12-day war, some limited and specific parts of our defense industry were also among the targets of the enemy's strikes during their aggression against our country." Unquote. Tehran credited a vast supply network for keeping its defense production lines moving, spreading design, research and manufacturing work across thousands of domestic partners. Around 8,000 private and knowledge-based firms previously worked with Iran's defense sector, supporting weapons research, components, maintenance and industrial production. Iran says the network has now expanded to roughly 9,300 to 9,400 companies, widening the domestic base that supports military manufacturing. That represents growth of approximately 20% in 1 year, according to Tehran's figures, as Iran claims to be increasing self-reliance under pressure. More than 1,000 types of weapons and defense systems are now produced, Iran says, ranging from missiles and drones to air defenses and other equipment. Universities and private companies also support defense production, linking academic research, technical expertise, and commercial industry to Iran's military sector. Iran says 76% of defense research projects reach the product stage, suggesting a large share of development work progressed into fieldable systems. Tehran also claimed its domestic arms industry can produce weapons far more cheaply, using local supply chains and indigenous technology to cut costs. Some Iranian weapons cost 1/10 or even 1/20 of foreign rivals, according to Mer News, giving Tehran a claimed advantage in sustaining large-scale production. Iran also claimed it now ranks among the world's top 10 powers in missile capability, citing its expanding domestic missile designs, production lines, and inventory. Tehran further claimed it remains among the world's leading states in drone warfare, stressing the role of unmanned systems in its regional military strategy. However, some new systems are deliberately kept secret to preserve battlefield surprise, limiting the public information available about Tehran's newest capabilities. This comes as U.S. missile stocks have been significantly depleted during the war with Iran, increasing the importance of industrial capacity in any prolonged confrontation. Donald Trump reportedly held back from a major escalation against Iran as Pentagon concerns over missile stockpiles grew, the New York Times reported. According to the New York Times, dwindling Patriot interceptor inventories became a major factor shaping White House deliberations on further military action. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Dan Kane reportedly warned that another large-scale war with Iran could strain U.S. air defense capabilities across the region. Kane reportedly told officials that expanding operations against Iran could reduce Patriot missile coverage protecting U.S. forces under CENTCOM. The reported concerns over air defense readiness ultimately became a key factor in President Trump's decision-making on possible further escalation. Meanwhile, U.S. Central Command said the American naval blockade against Iran remained fully enforced across the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM said U.S. forces redirected 12 commercial vessels that allegedly attempted to bypass the blockade on July 25. The U.S. military said 2 commercial ships were disabled after they ignored repeated warnings and failed to comply with blockade instructions. CENTCOM also said American forces boarded 2 commercial vessels to verify compliance with blockade enforcement measures in the Gulf. According to CENTCOM, a Comoros-flagged tanker was cleared after inspection, while another vessel was disabled for failing to comply. Statement by U.S. CENTCOM said, and I quote, "The U.S. naval blockade against Iran remains in full effect. As of July 25, CENTCOM has redirected 12 commercial vessels trying to run the blockade, disabled 2 that didn't comply, and boarded 2 to ensure total compliance." Earlier today, U.S. forces completed a verification boarding aboard Comoros-flagged MT Charmana in the Arabian Sea, and the tanker is now continuing its journey. CENTCOM forces disabled Mozambique-flagged MT Levine in the Gulf of Oman, July 24, after the crew attempted to violate the blockade multiple times and ignored repeated warnings. The ship is no longer transiting to Iran. Unquote. Donald Trump rejected reports claiming the U.S. was running low on munitions during the conflict, dismissing the assessments as inaccurate. Trump said the United States possessed far more munitions than any other country and more than it currently required. Earlier, The Wall Street Journal reported General Dan Kane had warned senior officials about declining U.S. air defense interceptor stockpiles. Meanwhile, Qatar and Oman discussed diplomatic efforts aimed at implementing the recently announced U.S.-Iran Memorandum of Understanding. Qatar urged all parties to pursue dialogue and safeguard freedom of navigation through the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz. As diplomatic contacts resumed, Al Arabiya reported China worked with Pakistan to help revive U.S.-Iran negotiations. Axios reported that CENTCOM chief Brad Cooper also urged ending strikes around Hormuz after the campaign had reached its objectives. According to Axios, Cooper assessed that the operation had significantly degraded Iran's ability to conduct maritime attacks. Cooper reportedly said most designated military targets had already been exhausted during Operation Epic Fury, Axios reported. Without launching a broader new offensive, Cooper reportedly concluded that extending the bombing campaign would serve no meaningful military purpose, Axios reported.
Upgrade your news experience with the all-new HT app. Download now.